So a while back, I picked up an Agilent 1680A logic analyzer, and I just kind of been spending a little bit of time reading up on it, learning about it, and recently been updating a couple of my PCBs so that I can easily connect into, for example, my 386 build, and also have these little breakout PCBs that allow me to connect the pod cables or the ribbon cables that come out of the logic analyzer into different circuits that I'm working on. And so I should have most of those. I'm hoping to have those PCBs in hand in the next few weeks, and then I can actually start doing some hands-on learning with the specific 1680A that I already have. But interestingly, I saw a 1680AD come up on eBay, and the AD offers really the main thing that it offers over the A is it's got quadruple the memory for really recording, I believe. So when I set up triggers or whatever it might be and how much data it can record 2 meg of memory at full channel recording versus a half meg, which is what the A supports. So the AD, I think, is essentially the same thing, but basically gives me more memory so that I have a deeper memory depth, I guess, when I get in and start recording some of this. And that's all stuff I need to learn more about. But this unit was on eBay, and the poster showed that it was having an issue reading the disk, some type of a disk read type of error. And the price on it was $200. So I thought I would maybe give it a shot and play around with it and see if I could get it to work. Or minimally just have some spare parts, whether it's the primary capture device, if I could swap that out into my working 1680A and get that extra memory depth, that'd be great. Or if I just had spare power supply and bezel and screen and whatever other cards or motherboard, whatever it might be in this system, I thought $200 is a pretty easy spend just for those spare parts. Especially when I look at most of these 1680 ADs that are functional are $1,000, $2,000, $3,000. So I thought, I'll take a gamble and see what I could do with $200. So here is the unit, and I'm going to go ahead and flip this over and start tearing it apart. Now, one of the things that I notice as I move it around and when I unboxed it, there's something clanking on the inside of it. So that's never a good sign when you move it around and you can hear things sliding and clanking. And then I got these basically screws I got to pull out of here. I can see some are missing, so I know this has been torn apart before because someone didn't bother to put in everything again. Also there you can see the pod connectors, basically where those pod cables will plug into the ribbon cables that I would then connect into my system. But let me get these different screws out of this so that I can slide this top cover off. And so I'm going to get out my handy dandy screwdriver set here and see if I can find the right size. Now, unfortunately, my recording camera is where it's mounted. I've got this as wide as it will view. So I know you're not going to get kind of a full view here, but hopefully this gives you the idea of what I'm working on. But I got to get these screws out of here. And then I can slide off basically the outside shell from the rest of the system. And maybe while I'm doing that, you can take a look at the back. There's a CD-ROM drive, and then you can see I've got a typical I/O type of panel. Basically, there's just a motherboard inside of this, so a keyboard, mouse, serial, VGA output. You'll also notice there's a VGA card. So there's a PCI-based VGA card in this, and then there's a FireWire card. That's the other expansion card that you see in there. Now you'll notice as I'm going through this, the audio, what I'm talking about, doesn't exactly line up with what I'm doing, and that's because when I recorded this, for some reason the audio failed to record, and I'm not going to go back and re-record the video portion of it, so I'm just kind of doing a voiceover here. got to get this handle off too before I slide off the chassis. So I'm just going to get that done here real quick. And while I'm doing that, back to this system, it's basically a motherboard, and underneath, maybe in the lower portion or the belly of this unit, there's a large, actual capture card. And it's not even a card, it's a full-size board, the full size of this chassis. So it's a large device. You'll see that here in a little bit as I get into this, that I've actually got maybe a little bit of cleanup I need to do on the bottom of it too, on that capture side of things. But let me get this chassis slid out here, and I'll get the housing set aside and then just set the chassis under the camera on my workbench so you can kind of get an idea of what's inside of this Agilent. Maybe other things to note, this unit is missing the plastic feet that would go under it, and it's missing the pod cables. And I notice as I pull off the chassis, this nice heatsink falls out, and that is what was rattling around inside of the system. So I'm guessing during shipping that fell off. And now this is the bottom view of that, basically this capture device. 4 of these, whatever the processors are there, I don't know anything about them, but one fell off, one is missing, one is loose, and one seems like it's fixed on there okay. So I'll have to remedy that at a later time. Quick shake test just to make sure there's nothing else loose. And if you look around, you'll see there are clumps of just dust and stuff. So this needs a good cleaning, but I should be good to go. And actually, I've already ordered up replacement heat sinks. I ordered up a set of them, so I might just replace all 4 with some brand new 2-way adhesive tape that will thermally conductive, basically meant for these types of heat sinks to get those remounted. Okay, so if I flip this over now, you can kind of see what's going on inside the system. It's a bit dirty. And the first thing I notice is there should be a hard drive over to the right, and there is no hard drive. There's a ribbon cable going to where that should be, and there's some screws taped to the bottom. That's a hard drive screws. So looking at this, here are those 2 cards, and there's a FireWire card here to the right. There's the video card to the left. And looking around here to see if there's anything else that looks out of place or damaged. Seems to look okay. So I'll have to address the hard drive. So one thing I can do is on the 1680 that I purchased, my currently working system, I took that initial hard drive and cloned it to an SSD, just a plain old SATA SSD, and replaced it. So what I'm going to do for this is take that hard drive and clone it again to another SSD and put it into this system and see if I can get this system to boot up with that same Windows 2000 image. I don't know if there's anything specific in the image that licenses it for the deeper memory depth capture device, the AD instead of the A, or if that's just the software really doesn't care one way or the other. But I've got to get that drive basically in and working, and to see if I can get something going there. Quick flash forward. Here I have a drive with a copy of the image from my other logic analyzer. So this is a Windows 2000 that I basically imaged over to a solid state. And I'll record a separate quick little video on really trying to convert old IDE drives to a solid state type of setup like I've done here. But the basic is I took a rotational disk, I used cloning software, cloned it over to this SSD, and then I have an IDE interface adapter that basically converts from IDE to SSD. And really what I'm trying to do is get the benefit of a new drive, get rid of the old rotational disk, which I don't have high confidence that it's going to last, if there even was a disk in this unit, which of course there wasn't. But I'm not going to put a rotational in it. So this is what I'm going to do here. So it's basically getting this ribbon connected up and fishing out the power cable in here, which should be in here somewhere. And so I'll get that power cable, get that connected up to this little adapter. So I'm just trying to track down where that cable is, and okay, here it is. I'm gonna go ahead and get that plugged in. So I've now got power, I've got my data cable, the ribbon cable hooked up. You know, this drive would normally screw to the chassis over there to the right. I'm just gonna set it in there for now. And then the next thing I'm gonna have to do is get keyboard and power hooked up, and I'll also hook up my video capture so that you can kind of see what I'm seeing as I boot up this system, or the best that video capture device will show it. So at this point I have a keyboard and mouse hooked up through a wireless dongle back here, just a USB dongle. I have a power cable running into the power supply. And I've also connected up my VGA capture device to the VGA output on the video card. And so really what I need to do now is to go ahead and fire up this system. And as I do that, you can see all the dust flying around from inside of the computer as those fans from inside the chassis turn on. And I'm getting a boot up screen, and I saw some of the Agilent stuff real quick, and now it's trying to start up Windows and crash. So the blue screen of death here is an inaccessible boot device. And so now I've got to figure out what can I do about that. And so it doesn't like something with that image that I brought over. And so the first thing I think of is I probably want to get into the BIOS. So I'm going to go ahead and restart the system here and try to get into the BIOS on this unit. So I'm pressing the delete key on the keyboard, and you can see here delete to enter setup. And okay, I now have to enter a password, which I have no password. So unfortunately, I was not supplied a password, or I didn't see a password anywhere, and I don't know if the seller even knew there was a password on this. I don't know if there's a standard Agilent password for the BIOS or not. So I'm going to have to resolve that to get this password off of the motherboard so that I can get into the BIOS and just make sure it's seeing the disk correctly and take it from there. Okay, I removed the password from the BIOS. Basically, there's a jumper on the motherboard to clear the BIOS, and on this system, that's all you have to do to clear that password also. So I'm in the BIOS, just basically double checking that it sees the drive. Now, one thing I did do between video cuts here is I did also swap out the IDE ribbon cable. I thought I saw maybe a defect in the cable, or a spot where a wire was potentially bad. So just to be safe, I grabbed a different IDE cable. And just really cycling through the BIOS screens here and seeing if there's anything that catches my eye. You know, it showed the disk correctly, so that didn't seem to be a problem. Looking to see if there's anything else that might be some type of configuration thing that could potentially cause it to not want to boot into Windows 2000. But as I'm going through this, I'm really not finding anything that seems like a concern. You know, there's this configuration data. I'm going to go ahead and clear that. That's more for basically plug and play type of devices, I believe, on how the system detects and stores information about it. But this is an old system, and I'm just taking a guess at some of that. So this all seems relatively in order, so I'm not too worried about it. So I'm going to go ahead and just save out of the BIOS and see if I get the same result, which I'm probably going to get the same result since I really haven't changed much at this point other than clearing a BIOS password. And so letting this boot up, what you're going to see is that I run into the same blue screen. So then I have to determine what is the potential cause for that. And my guess at this point, as I'm going through the troubleshooting process, is it's probably a difference in the disk controller drivers between my 1680A and the 1680AD. Maybe it's a different motherboard. I haven't tried to look at the detailed specs of the motherboards, but I think Agilent used a handful of different ones in the 1680s. And so it could be that this motherboard is using a different driver. That Windows 2000 image that I'm using from the other computer probably doesn't have the proper driver on it. And so when it tries to boot up here, it fails. So at this point, I have the system up and running. What I did is I grabbed a different SSD that I had sitting around, just an old one, and I put that into the system here. So I took the one that had the image from my 1680A, I set it aside. I grabbed this other SSD and put it in just so that I could experiment and see, could I load up a Windows XP, for example. That's a CD and a license that I've got handy. So I grabbed a Windows XP CD, put it into the CD-ROM that is actually on the back side of the unit here, and basically booted up to that and wiped out the disk, installed Windows XP, and then I installed the Agilent software for the logic analyzer. And what you're seeing here on the screen as this is running is I'm doing a self-test of the system. And as I pop that CD in, it pops up the auto run for Windows XP. So I'll just get back out of that. But in the background here, what it's doing is I'm doing the self-test from the Agilent software. And really it's testing out the capture hardware on the lower part of the chassis. And as I'm talking here, it looks like it finished and it passed. So that is great. So at this point, I have Windows XP, a clean OS running. I have the Agilent software running, and it passed all of its internal tests. Now, I haven't actually hooked it up to pull in an external signal, but this is a good indicator that it's seeing the hardware and it's able to do the diagnostic tests on that hardware. And so really the thing I'm missing then at this point is I need to grab some pod cables. I will comment that I will probably just use the pod cables from my other system. Pod cables are hard to find and they are really expensive. This entire unit cost me $200 plus shipping. A set of pod cables costs minimum $600, if not thousands of dollars, which is a little crazy. But as I open this up, you can see that I've got the video card showing up correctly. There's nothing in the device manager that shows any errors. Even the FireWire card here is working fine, and that's how it's going to be connecting to that device underneath for all the capture. It's all done through FireWire, and all of that seems to be working. So I've got my video output out of my primary card, and FireWire is working, and so I think I'm sitting pretty good at this point. So if I close out of that and maybe jump back into the software, that's all coming up fine, and I think I'm sitting pretty good. So I guess what I have left now is to mount this drive over to the side of the chassis. I'll do a little bit of cleanup because there is still a lot of dust here, so I think I can clean this up a bit. And then I'll have to decide if I want to try to track down some additional cables or just leverage the single set. I have a full set for my other 1680A. I could leverage those cables. And I did see someone had posted a write-up on the teardown of these cables and kind of what it would take to build your own. They're not just simple standard ribbon cables, so it would take a little bit of I don't know, a little bit of work on my part to actually make cables that would work, but I might give it a shot just for the fun of it. Maybe even at lower speeds they'd work fine. Maybe they wouldn't work so well at high speed, but or I'll keep my eye out for an opportunistic place to purchase another set of cables if I see some come along. So at the end of the day, I'm going to consider this a nice win. I bought this kind of for some spare parts, and it appears that I have the system up and running. The self-tests are all working fine. And now I've got a 1680AD that I can work with in addition to my 1680A.